My name is Olivia Gomez. I'm 29 years old, a forensic accountant living in the heart of Miami, Florida, where palm trees sway against azure skies and modern glass towers reflect the endless horizon. From the outside, my life appears perfectly orchestrated, a successful career tracking financial crimes for corporate clients, a loving husband Marcus, and our twin daughters Sophia and Isabella, age 6, who fill our Spanish colonial home with laughter and chaos. But this morning, as I stepped out onto our terracotta-tiled patio, the humid Miami air carried something more than the usual scent of jasmine and ocean breeze. It carried a warning I couldn't yet understand. Before you read this story, tell us where you are watching from and add like and subscribe to this video. I stood there holding my morning café con leche, watching the girls chase each other around the fountain in our courtyard. Marcus had already left for his architecture firm, kissing me goodbye with that familiar smile that still made my heart skip after 8 years of marriage. Today was supposed to be significant, the reading of my grandmother Isabella Herrera's will. She had been more than family to me. She was my anchor, my compass, the woman who taught me that integrity wasn't just a word, but a way of life. Abuela Isabella had built her fortune from nothing, transforming a small import business into a sprawling enterprise that connected Latin America with the United States. She was fierce, brilliant, and commanded respect in boardrooms full of men who initially underestimated the petite woman with steel-gray eyes. To me, she was simply the grandmother who braided my hair while telling stories of her homeland, who taught me to balance ledgers when I was 12, who whispered, "Mija, remember that money reveals character, it doesn't create it." But since her passing 3 months ago, our family had transformed into something unrecognizable. The warmth that once filled our gatherings had been replaced by cold calculation and barely concealed hostility. My mother, Carmen Gomez, spoke of the inheritance with a desperation that made my stomach turn. My father, Roberto, tried to maintain his diplomatic facade, but I caught the way his eyes tracked every expensive item in Abuela's house during the funeral reception. My older brother Diego had become openly combative, throwing around accusations about who deserved what, as if love could be measured in dollar signs. I wanted no part of their schemes. My forensic accounting practice provided more than enough for my family, and I treasured the memories of my grandmother far more than any material legacy she might leave behind. But they kept pulling me into meetings, arguments, and discussions that left me drained and disgusted. I sighed, setting down my coffee cup on the wrought iron table, and walked toward the silver BMW parked in our circular driveway. Today, I had to drive to the law office of Elena Rodriguez downtown for the will reading. I wasn't looking forward to it, but I knew Abuela would have wanted me there. Perhaps, I hoped desperately, once the will was read, my family could begin healing from this destructive obsession with money. I opened the car door, slipped into the leather driver's seat, and had just inserted the key when I heard frantic knocking on the passenger window. My heart jumped, and I turned to see Rosa Martinez, the elderly woman who lived in the small guest house behind our property. Rosa had been our housekeeper for years before arthritis forced her into retirement, but we'd kept her on as part of our extended family. Her weathered hands were pressed against the glass, her usually calm brown eyes wide with urgency. Rosa wasn't a stranger to me. For 5 years, she'd been like a second mother, teaching me traditional recipes, helping with the girls when they were babies, sharing stories of her life in Colombia. She had a quiet dignity and an almost supernatural intuition about people. But this morning, she wasn't smiling. She was terrified. She knocked again, harder this time, her voice muffled but desperate through the glass. "Señora Olivia, no tome ese carro." Don't take that car. I quickly rolled down the window, my pulse quickening. "Rosa, ¿qué pasa?" "What's wrong?" She was breathing heavily, her small frame trembling as she clutched a worn shawl around her shoulders. "Last night, señora. Last night I couldn't sleep because of my arthritis. I was sitting by my window, drinking tea for the pain, when I saw someone crawling under your car." My blood turned to ice. "Someone under my car? Who? What did you see?" Rosa's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. It was very late, maybe 2 in the morning. A person dressed in dark clothes with a hood covering their face. They had tools, Senora. They were doing something underneath your car for maybe 10-15 minutes. When they finished, they looked around very carefully and then disappeared into the shadows. A cold wave of dread washed over me. I looked at Rosa's face, searching for any sign that she might be confused or mistaken, but her eyes held only truth and genuine fear. My hands began to shake as I turned off the engine. Rosa, are you absolutely certain? You're sure it wasn't someone from the neighborhood, maybe working on their own car? She shook her head firmly. No, señora. This person came specifically to your car. They knew exactly where to go, what to do. And the way they moved, like a shadow, muy cuidadoso. Very careful not to be seen. But I was watching from my window because I couldn't sleep. I felt my throat constrict. Slowly, I opened the car door and stepped out onto the warm concrete driveway. The morning sun was bright, but I felt as if I was moving through a nightmare. I knelt down beside the car, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Rosa knelt beside me, her arthritic hands pointing toward the undercarriage. There, señora. Look there. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then my eyes adjusted to the shadows beneath the car, and what I discovered made my breath catch in my throat. A dark puddle had formed under the vehicle, not oil but brake fluid. The liquid was fresh, still slightly warm from leaking throughout the night. I reached out with trembling fingers and touched the sticky substance. I forced myself to look more closely, and that's when I saw it. The brake line had been cut, not accidentally damaged, but deliberately severed with what appeared to be a sharp knife or cutting tool. The cut was clean, precise, professional. If I had started this car and driven onto Miami's busy highways, the brakes would have failed completely. An accident or my death would have been inevitable. I sank back onto my heels, the world spinning around me. Someone had tried to kill me. Someone had crept through the darkness to sabotage my car, knowing I would drive to the will reading this morning. But who? And why? I looked up at Rosa, my voice barely a whisper. Rosa, you saved my life. If you hadn't seen this person, if you hadn't warned me. The old woman placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, her eyes soft with compassion but alert with concern. Senora Olivia, you have been so good to me, to my family. When my granddaughter needed surgery and I had no money, you paid for everything. When my son lost his job, you found work for him at Senor Marcus's firm. You never made me feel like charity. Today, I just returned the kindness you showed me. I pulled out my wallet and tried to give her money, but she refused with a firm shake of her head. No, señora. Let me feel proud of doing something good. But you must be very careful now. Someone wants to hurt you and they might try again. As Rosa walked back to her guest house, I remained crouched beside my car, my mind racing. Who could hate me enough to want me dead? And why today of all days, the day of my grandmother's will reading? My thoughts immediately turned to my family. My mother Carmen, who had been making increasingly desperate comments about the inheritance. My father Roberto, whose gambling debts were larger than he thought anyone knew, but I'd discovered them accidentally while reviewing some family financial documents. My brother Diego, whose startup company was hemorrhaging money despite his claims of success. Could they really believe that I was standing between them and Abuela Isabella's fortune? Could they actually think that killing me would somehow benefit them? The idea seemed impossibly cruel, but the evidence beneath my car was undeniable. I pulled out my phone, my finger hovering over the emergency number. Every instinct told me to call the police immediately, to let them investigate this attempted murder. But then I hesitated. As a forensic accountant, I knew how these investigations worked. I knew how easily evidence could disappear, how suspects could cover their tracks when they knew they were being watched. If I called the police now, whoever did this would realize I had discovered their plan. They would disappear, destroy evidence, and I might never know the truth. No. I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to catch them in the act of believing they had succeeded. A dangerous idea began forming in my mind. It was risky, possibly reckless, but it might be the only way to expose the person who wanted me dead. If I could stage my own accident, make my family believe their plan had worked, I might be able to observe their true reactions. Only when they thought they were safe would they reveal themselves. I paced around my car, the Miami sun beating down on my shoulders as I worked through the logistics. I would need help, someone I could trust completely, someone with the skills to make this deception believable. I thought of Dr. Amanda Chun, my closest friend from college, now an emergency room physician at Miami General Hospital. Amanda owed my family a significant debt. Years ago, when her parents' restaurant was failing and she couldn't afford medical school, my grandmother had quietly paid her tuition, asking only that she become the best doctor she could be. I dialed Amanda's number, my hands still trembling slightly. "Olivia? This is early for you. What's happening?" Amanda's voice was alert despite the early hour. I quickly explained everything: Rose's warning, the cut brake line, my suspicions about my family. My voice shook as I described the fear that was consuming me. "Someone tried to kill me, Amanda. Someone in my own family, I think. And they might try again if I don't do something drastic." There was silence on the other end, and for a moment I thought she might have hung up. Then she sighed deeply. "Olivia, this sounds incredibly dangerous. If you're right about your family, you need to involve the police immediately." "No," I said firmly. "If I call the police now, whoever did this will know I'm onto them. They'll disappear, destroy evidence, and I'll spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, never knowing when they might strike again. I need them to believe they succeeded. I need to see their true faces when they think I'm gone." Another long pause. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I want to stage a car accident. I want everyone, the police, the media, my family, to believe I've been critically injured, maybe even that I'm clinically dead. Only when they think I'm gone will I be able to see who they really are." "Olivia, that's insane. The legal implications alone could destroy your life. And what about Marcus? Sophia and Isabella? Are you going to lie to your husband and daughters too?" The mention of my family made my chest tighten with pain. I didn't want to deceive Marcus and the girls, didn't want them to experience the agony of thinking they had lost me. But if I did nothing, if I allowed this threat to continue, I might never come home to them at all. "I know it's risky," I whispered. "But Amanda, I'm a forensic accountant. I've spent years studying how criminals think, how they cover their tracks. If I don't catch this person now while they think they've won, they'll disappear and I'll never have proof." Amanda was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke, her voice reluctant but determined. "Your grandmother saved my career, Olivia. She gave me a chance when no one else would. If this is what you need, if this is the only way to protect you and your family in the long run, then I'll help you. But you have to promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," I said, relief flooding through me. After hanging up with Amanda, I knew I needed one more person for this plan to work. Someone who could watch my family without being detected, someone who could document their actions and reactions. Through my forensic accounting work, I had connections with several private investigation firms in Miami. The best was run by Carlos Mendoza, a former FBI agent whose sharp instincts and technological expertise had helped me crack several complex financial fraud cases. I called Carlos, knowing he would answer immediately despite the early hour. "Olivia Gomez," his voice was crisp and professional. "This is an unusual time for a call. What kind of case are we dealing with?" "Carlos, someone tried to kill me last night. I need surveillance on my family members, complete monitoring of their activities, communications, and financial transactions. Can you handle it?" Carlos let out a low whistle. "You're serious? Attempted murder? Have you contacted the police?" "Not yet. I have a plan, but I need evidence first. Real evidence that will hold up in court and expose whoever is behind this." "All right," he said after a moment. "You know my rates. Send me the details and I'll have teams in place within hours. But Olivia, be very careful. Family members who resort to violence are often the most unpredictable." I spent the next hour in my home office, organizing the plan that would either save my life or destroy it. I arranged for the brake line to be quickly repaired by a trusted mechanic, ensuring the car would be safe for the staged accident. I researched quiet locations on the outskirts of Miami where I could crash the car without endangering innocent people. Every detail had to be perfect. By mid-morning I was ready. I had found the perfect location, a secluded stretch of road near the Everglades, with thick vegetation on both sides and minimal traffic. There was a sturdy oak tree positioned just right for a convincing crash that wouldn't actually cause serious injury if executed properly. Amanda had arranged for a trusted ambulance crew to be in position, along with theatrical blood and medical supplies to simulate severe injuries. Carlos had surveillance teams following my parents and brother, ready to document their every move after news of the accident broke. I drove to the location, my heart pounding with adrenaline and fear. The midday sun filtered through the Spanish moss hanging from ancient oak trees, creating a dreamlike atmosphere that seemed surreal given what I was about to do. I parked the car, took several deep breaths, and stepped out. I carefully positioned a brick on the accelerator and aimed the vehicle toward the oak tree, making sure the trajectory would create dramatic damage without causing a potentially fatal impact. 3, 2, 1. I released the brake and dove clear as the car shot forward. The crash was thunderous, metal crumpling, glass shattering, the airbag deploying with explosive force. White smoke billowed from the hood, and the front end was completely destroyed. To anyone arriving at the scene, it would look like a horrific accident. Within minutes, I heard the wail of approaching sirens. Amanda had executed her part perfectly. The paramedics arrived with professional urgency, and I lay motionless on the ground as they applied fake blood and simulated severe injuries. One of them, briefed by Amanda, called out dramatically, "Critical injuries. Possible internal bleeding. We need to get her to trauma immediately." I kept my eyes closed and my breathing shallow as they loaded me onto a stretcher. The performance had begun and there was no turning back now. At the hospital, Amanda had prepared a secure room in the administrative wing where I could monitor the situation through the security camera network. She entered the room as soon as the paramedics had left, her face tense with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked, checking me over despite knowing the injuries were fake. "I'm fine," I replied, though my voice was shaky. "Thank you, Amanda. I know this isn't easy." She squeezed my hand. "Your family should be arriving soon. Are you ready for this?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was ready for anything. I stared at the bank of monitors showing various hospital corridors, waiting for the people I loved most in the world to appear, and dreading what I might discover about them. They arrived within an hour. My mother Carmen rushed in first, her perfectly styled hair disheveled, her face pale with what appeared to be genuine shock. My father Roberto followed, moving more slowly, his business suit wrinkled as if he had dressed hastily. Diego came last, his usual confident swagger replaced by a tense, nervous energy that immediately caught my attention. They gathered in the waiting area, and on the surface they looked like any family facing a medical crisis. But I watched their body language carefully, looking for the subtle signs that my forensic training had taught me to recognize. Amanda approached them in her role as attending physician, her voice grave. "I'm Dr. Chen. Olivia's condition is extremely critical. We're doing everything we can, but the next few hours will determine whether she survives." I watched my mother collapse into a chair, apparently overwhelmed with grief. My father paced back and forth, running his hands through his graying hair. But it was Diego's reaction that sent chills down my spine. While my parents displayed obvious distress, my brother's eyes kept darting around the room, and I could swear I saw a brief flash of satisfaction cross his face before he composed himself into an expression of concern. Amanda returned to my monitoring room an hour later, closing the door softly behind her. "What did you see?" she asked. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. My parents seemed genuinely upset, but Diego, there's something off about his behavior. I need more time to observe them. Carlos called. "His surveillance teams are in position. Every move your family makes from now on will be documented." I nodded, settling in for what I knew would be the most difficult part of this ordeal, waiting and watching as the people I loved most revealed their true natures. Over the next few hours, I observed my family through the security cameras. They took turns sitting vigil, speaking in hushed tones, occasionally embracing each other for comfort. But I began to notice patterns that disturbed me. When my father thought no one was watching, he made several phone calls, speaking quietly into his cell phone with urgent, secretive gestures. My mother, despite her apparent grief, kept checking her expensive watch and glancing toward the exit as if she had somewhere else she needed to be. And Diego. Diego kept disappearing for long periods, claiming he was going outside for air, but always returning with a subtle smirk that made my stomach turn. By evening, Amanda came to check on me again. "Carlos sent an initial report," she said, handing me a tablet. "You need to see this." I scrolled through Carlos's surveillance notes, and what I read made my blood run cold. Within hours of my accident, Diego had made 3 separate phone calls to an unlisted number. My father had visited his bank and made a large cash withdrawal. Most disturbing of all, my mother had called Elena Rodriguez, my grandmother's lawyer, asking about emergency procedures for reading the will when a beneficiary was incapacitated. "They're not grieving," I whispered, staring at the evidence on the screen. "They're positioning themselves to take advantage of my condition." Amanda placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, Olivia. I know this isn't what you wanted to discover." But I wasn't ready to condemn them yet. Perhaps they were simply being practical, trying to handle necessary arrangements during a crisis. I needed more evidence, something concrete that would prove their involvement in the attempt on my life. That evidence came the next morning, in a way I never could have anticipated. Carlos called early, his voice tight with urgency. "Olivia, we need to meet. Diego made contact with someone last night, someone you need to know about." An hour later, Carlos arrived at the hospital with a thick file under his arm. He spread photographs across the table in front of me, and I felt my world tilt on its axis. The photos showed Diego meeting with a man I didn't recognize, tall, lean, with cold eyes and the kind of face that suggested familiarity with violence. They were in a parking garage downtown, and the images clearly showed Diego handing the man an envelope. "His name is Victor Santos," Carlos explained. "He's a professional saboteur, someone who specializes in making accidents look natural. Car breaks, gas leaks, faulty electrical systems. He's suspected in at least 6 deaths over the past 5 years, but he's never been caught." I stared at the photographs, my hands trembling. "You're telling me my brother hired a professional killer?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you. We also intercepted some of Diego's phone communications. He's been planning this for weeks, waiting for the right opportunity. The will reading provided the perfect timing." The room seemed to spin around me. Diego, my brother, who used to build sandcastles with me on Miami Beach, who taught me to ride a bicycle, who I had always looked up to despite our recent conflicts, had tried to have me murdered. "There's more," Carlos continued. "Santos isn't working alone. He's been in contact with your father, Roberto. We have recorded conversations discussing payment schedules and cleanup procedures." I felt physically sick. Not just Diego, but my father too. The man who had walked me down the aisle at my wedding, who read bedtime stories to Sophia and Isabella, who I had always believed loved me unconditionally, had conspired to have me killed. What about my mother? I asked, dreading the answer. Carlos shook his head. "So far, we have no evidence of Carmen's direct involvement. She may genuinely believe you were in an accident. But Olivia, we need to move quickly. Santos is still in Miami, and if your family realizes their first attempt failed, they might try again." I stood up, pacing around the small room as the full magnitude of the betrayal sank in. My brother and father had chosen money over my life. They had calculated that my death was worth whatever inheritance they thought they would gain. "I want to confront them," I said, my voice harder than I'd ever heard it. "I want to see their faces when they realize their plan failed." "That's dangerous, Olivia. Santos is still out there, and desperate people make unpredictable choices." "Then help me make sure they can't hurt anyone else. I want enough evidence to put them away forever." Carlos nodded grimly. "We'll need to catch them in the act of thinking they've succeeded. Are you prepared to see this through to the end?" I thought of Sophia and Isabella, of Marcus, of the life I had built that my own family had tried to destroy. "I'm prepared to do whatever it takes." The plan we developed was more complex than my original idea. Carlos would arrange for Victor Santos to be arrested on outstanding warrants, removing the immediate physical threat. Meanwhile, I would continue the pretense of being critically injured while we gathered evidence of my family's financial motivations and their reactions to my supposed condition. What we discovered over the next 2 days was a web of greed and desperation that ran deeper than I had imagined. Through Carlos's surveillance, we learned that Diego's startup company wasn't just struggling, it was completely bankrupt. He owed money to investors who weren't the patient type, people who had made it clear that failure to repay would have serious consequences. My inheritance represented his only chance of avoiding financial ruin and possibly physical harm. My father's gambling debts were even worse than I had suspected. He owed nearly $500,000 to various creditors, and they were starting to make threats against the entire family. He had been borrowing against his share of my grandmother's estate, but that wouldn't be enough to satisfy his debts unless he could access additional funds, like my inheritance. But the most shocking discovery came when Carlos intercepted a phone conversation between Diego and my father discussing their contingency plans. "If Olivia doesn't die from the accident," Diego's voice came through clearly on the recording, "we'll have to try something else. Santos knows other methods. House fires can be very convincing." "Are you sure this is the only way?" my father asked, though his voice lacked conviction. "She's my daughter, Diego. She's standing between us and everything we need to survive," Diego replied coldly. "Abuela Isabella always favored her anyway. This is just correcting an injustice." When I heard that recording, sitting in the darkened hospital room, I felt something inside me break and then harden into steel. These weren't desperate people making a single terrible mistake. They were calculating predators who saw me as an obstacle to be eliminated. But I wasn't finished gathering evidence. I needed to know the full extent of their plan, and I needed proof that would hold up in court. The opportunity came during my grandmother's will reading, which Elena Rodriguez agreed to reschedule as an emergency session given my critical condition. Elena, who had known our family for decades, was devastated by my accident and eager to ensure that my affairs were in order in case I didn't survive. What she didn't know was that I would be watching the entire proceeding through a hidden camera that Carlos had installed in her conference room. I watched from my hospital room as my family gathered around Elena's polished mahogany table. My mother looked genuinely distraught, her eyes red from crying, her hands shaking as she reached for tissues. But my father and Diego displayed a different energy, tense anticipation barely concealed beneath expressions of grief. Elena began reading the will, her voice solemn and respectful. As she outlined my grandmother's wishes, I saw my family's reactions with perfect clarity. The will was not what any of them had expected. My grandmother, Isabella Herrera, had indeed left the majority of her estate to me, not out of favoritism, but because she had seen the same calculating greed in the rest of the family that I was witnessing now. Her letter, read aloud by Elena, was brutally honest. "I have watched my family change over the years, and I have seen how money corrupts even the people we love most. Roberto's gambling, Diego's reckless business ventures, and Carmen's increasing materialism have shown me that they are not ready for the responsibility of significant wealth. Only Olivia has demonstrated the integrity and wisdom to use this inheritance for good." But then came the part that made my father and Diego exchange sharp glances. "However," Elena continued reading, "if anything happens to Olivia before she reaches the age of 35, or if she dies without children, the estate will not pass to her surviving family members. Instead, it will be donated entirely to charitable organizations, specifically those supporting education for underprivileged children in Latin America." I watched Diego's face turn pale as the implications sank in. My father's hands clenched into fists. They hadn't just tried to murder me for money, they had tried to murder me for money they would never receive anyway. The irony was devastating and perfect. Their greed had driven them to commit an unspeakable crime for an inheritance they could never have claimed. But Elena wasn't finished reading. "Furthermore," she continued, I have instructed my lawyers to investigate thoroughly any suspicious circumstances surrounding Olivia's death, should such a tragedy occur. I trust Olivia completely, but I do not trust those who might benefit from her absence. My grandmother had suspected that someone in the family might try to harm me. Even from beyond the grave, she was protecting me. I watched my father stand up abruptly and leave the room, his face flushed with anger and shame. Diego followed him, and through the hidden microphones Carlos had placed, I heard their heated conversation in the hallway. You said the old woman favored Olivia, but you never mentioned this clause. My father hissed at Diego. I didn't know. Diego shot back. But it doesn't matter now. Olivia's as good as dead, and no one will ever prove we were involved. What if she survives? What if Santos screwed up? Then we'll have to find another way. But Roberto, we're too deep in this now. There's no going back. Carlos had been right, they weren't going to stop with one attempt. They were committed to a course that would end with my death, regardless of the cost. But they had made one crucial mistake. They assumed I was helpless, lying unconscious in a hospital bed, unaware of their treachery. They had no idea that every word they spoke, every move they made, was being documented and prepared for use against them. The next morning, I made the decision to end the deception. Carlos had gathered enough evidence to ensure convictions, and Victor Santos was already in custody, providing testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence. It was time to reveal the truth. But first, I needed to return to the people who truly mattered: Marcus, Sophia, and Isabella. I had been unconscious for 3 days when I finally came home. Marcus was at the hospital, maintaining his vigil as the devoted husband, when Amanda approached him with carefully prepared news of my miraculous recovery. The joy and relief in his eyes when he saw me sitting up in bed, apparently awakening from my coma, nearly broke my heart. I had put him through hell, and the guilt was overwhelming. Olivia, he whispered, taking my hands in his, I thought I was going to lose you. The girls have been asking for you every day. They don't understand why Mama couldn't come home. I couldn't tell him the truth, not yet. Not until this was finished. I'm okay, I said, forcing a smile. I'm going to be okay. But Marcus, I need you to trust me on something. There are things I need to handle before I can truly come home. Legal things related to the accident. He looked confused but nodded. Whatever you need. Just don't scare us like that again. That afternoon, Elena Rodriguez called an emergency meeting at her office. This time I would be there in person, and my family would discover that their victim was very much alive. I arrived early and took my seat at the conference table, my heart pounding with anticipation and dread. Carlos was positioned outside with a team of police officers, ready to make arrests as soon as I gave the signal. My family entered the room expecting to discuss my funeral arrangements and the complex legal issues surrounding my inheritance in light of my grandmother's will. Instead, they found me sitting calmly at the head of the table, very much alive. My mother gasped and rushed toward me, tears streaming down her face. Her reaction seemed genuine, and I began to believe that she truly had been an innocent victim of my father and Diego's conspiracy. But my father froze in the doorway, his face cycling through shock, disbelief, and then something that looked remarkably like disappointment. Diego's reaction was even more telling. For just a moment, his mask slipped completely, and I saw naked fury in his eyes before he recovered his composure. Olivia, he said, his voice carefully controlled. Thank God you're alive. We were so worried. I stood up slowly, my eyes never leaving his face. Were you, Diego? Were you really worried? Something in my tone made him step backward. My father moved closer to Diego, and I could see them exchanging subtle glances. Of course we were worried, my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. You're our daughter, our sister. We love you. Do you? I asked quietly. Do you really love me, Roberto? Did you love me when you hired Victor Santos to cut my brake lines? The silence in the room was absolute. My mother looked confused, glancing between me and the others as if trying to understand a conversation in a foreign language. But Diego and my father, their faces told me everything I needed to know. I don't know what you're talking about, Diego said, but his voice was strained. I opened the folder in front of me and spread out the photographs Carlos had taken. Diego meeting with Victor Santos, money changing hands, recorded conversations discussing my death as if it were a business transaction. I know everything, I said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. I know about your debts, Diego. I know about your gambling problem, Roberto. I know you both decided that murdering me was easier than solving your own problems. My mother sank into a chair, her face pale with shock. What is this? What are you talking about? They tried to kill me, Mama, I said, my voice breaking slightly. My own brother and father paid a professional saboteur to cut my brake lines so they could inherit Abuela's money. Diego suddenly lunged toward the door, but Carlos and the police officers were ready. They entered the room with practiced efficiency, handcuffs ready. Diego Gomez, Roberto Gomez, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, the lead officer announced. As they read them their rights, Diego turned to me with pure hatred in his eyes. You always thought you were better than us, he snarled. Abuela's precious granddaughter, with your perfect life and your perfect family. You never understood what it was like to struggle. I understood struggle, I replied quietly. I just chose to work through it honestly instead of trying to murder the people who loved me. My father said nothing as they led him away, but the look he gave me was one of shame and defeat. Whatever love had once existed between us was gone forever, destroyed by his greed and his willingness to sacrifice his daughter for money. The legal consequences were swift and severe. Victor Santos, already in custody, provided detailed testimony about the conspiracy in exchange for a plea deal. The evidence Carlos had gathered, recordings, photographs, financial records, painted a clear picture of premeditated attempted murder. Diego received a sentence of 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder and solicitation of a crime. My father, as an accomplice, received 15 years. Both men would be elderly by the time they were eligible for parole. But perhaps the most devastating consequence was the destruction of our family's reputation. The story became front-page news throughout Florida, daughter stages death to catch family killers. The Herrera name, which my grandmother had built through decades of honest business dealings, was tarnished by the scandal. My mother, who had been genuinely innocent of the plot, was devastated. She moved to California to live with her sister, unable to bear the shame of what her husband and son had done. We stayed in contact, but our relationship would never fully recover from the trauma. The reading of my grandmother's will took place 2 weeks later, in the same conference room where I had confronted my family. This time only Elena Rodriguez and I were present, along with Marcus, who had finally learned the full truth of what I had done. Elena read the will aloud, her voice steady but sad. As expected, I inherited the bulk of my grandmother's estate, not because she loved me more than the others, but because she had correctly assessed the character of each family member. But there was one final surprise. In addition to the main provisions of this will, Elena read, I have included a sealed letter specifically for Olivia, to be opened only after the full truth about any threats to her safety have been revealed. Elena handed me an envelope with my grandmother's distinctive handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing a letter that would change everything I thought I knew about my family's dynamics. My dearest Olivia, the letter began, if you are reading this, it means my suspicions about the dangers you might face were correct. I want you to know that your safety was my greatest concern in my final years, not because I loved you more than the others, but because I recognized that your integrity would make you a target for those who had lost their way. I looked up at Marcus, who was reading over my shoulder, his expression growing more concerned with each word. The letter continued, I have been aware of Roberto's gambling debts for several years. I hired private investigators to monitor the situation, hoping he would find a way to overcome his addiction. Similarly, I knew about Diego's business failures and his increasingly desperate attempts to maintain his lifestyle. I had hoped that family love would prevent them from crossing certain lines, but I prepared for the possibility that it would not. My breath caught as I read the next paragraph. In a safety deposit box at First National Bank, you will find additional evidence I gathered about threats that were made against you in the months before my death. Diego approached me directly 3 times, asking for early access to his inheritance, becoming increasingly angry when I refused. During our final conversation, he made statements that I found deeply troubling, statements about how the family would be better off if certain obstacles were removed. Elena looked at me with concern. Olivia, your grandmother was trying to protect you even before she died. She suspected this might happen. I felt tears beginning to form as I continued reading. I also want you to know about Carmen. Your mother is not involved in any plots against you. Her materialism, while disappointing, never extended to violence or genuine malice. She is weak rather than evil, and I hope you will find a way to forgive her for not seeing what was happening in her own family. The relief I felt about my mother's innocence was overwhelming. At least one parent had truly loved me. Finally, my dear granddaughter, I want you to understand why I structured my will as I did. The clause preventing Roberto and Diego from inheriting if anything happened to you was not punishment, it was protection. I knew that removing their financial incentive was the only way to ensure your safety in the long term. The letter concluded with words that made me cry openly. You have always been my pride and joy, not because you were perfect, but because you chose goodness even when it would have been easier to choose selfishness. Use this inheritance to build the kind of life your children will be proud to remember. And remember that the greatest legacy is not what we leave behind in material wealth, but what we leave behind in the hearts of those who love us. Marcus wrapped his arms around me as I finished reading, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt truly safe. But my grandmother's preparations extended beyond the letter. The safety deposit box Elena helped me access contained detailed financial records showing the extent of my father and brother's debts, recorded phone conversations where Diego had made increasingly threatening statements, and even photographs of Diego meeting with unsavory characters in the months before my grandmother's death. Most shocking of all was a video recording my grandmother had made just weeks before her death, sitting in her study with the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Olivia, her voice came through clearly on the recording, if you are watching this, it means my worst fears have come true. I want you to know that I tried to reach out to Roberto and Diego, tried to get them help for their problems. But some people cannot be saved from themselves. She paused, looking directly into the camera with those steel-gray eyes I remembered so well. I recorded this because I want you to understand that what happened to you was not your fault. You did not cause their greed. You did not create their desperation. You were simply the convenient target for people who had lost their moral compass entirely. Watching my grandmother speak those words, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The guilt I had been feeling about destroying my family began to fade, replaced by a clear understanding that they had destroyed themselves. The video continued. I also want to tell you about a fund I have established, separate from my main estate. It is designed to help families who have been torn apart by financial crimes, particularly when family members have victimized each other. I want you to oversee this foundation, using your skills as a forensic accountant to help others who find themselves in situations similar to yours. The Isabella Herrera Foundation for Family Justice became my life's work in the years that followed. Working with Carlos Mendoza's investigation firm and Amanda Chen's medical expertise, we developed programs to help families identify and address financial abuse before it escalated to violence. Our first major case involved helping a young man whose siblings had been stealing his inheritance through forged documents. Our second case helped a woman discover that her husband was planning to fake her death for insurance money. Each case reminded me why my grandmother's final gift was so important, not the money itself, but the opportunity to use that money to protect others. But the most important part of my recovery was rebuilding trust with my own family, the family I had chosen rather than the one I was born into. Marcus struggled for months with the knowledge of what I had done, particularly my decision to deceive him and put our daughters through the trauma of thinking their mother had died. We attended counseling together, working through the complex emotions surrounding my choices. I understand why you did it, he said during one particularly difficult session. I understand that you were trying to protect us in the long run. But Olivia, you made decisions about our family without including us. You put Sophia and Isabella through hell because you thought you knew what was best for everyone. He was right, and accepting that was one of the hardest parts of my recovery. My forensic training had taught me to think strategically, to gather evidence and build cases, but I had applied those same calculating methods to my most intimate relationships. I was terrified, I admitted to him. I was so afraid that if I involved you, if I told you what I suspected, that somehow you and the girls would become targets too. I thought I was protecting you by handling it alone. But we're a team, Marcus replied. We're supposed to face threats together, not separately. It took nearly a year of counseling, honest conversations, and patient rebuilding before our marriage felt strong again. But in many ways, we emerged from the crisis with a deeper understanding of each other and a renewed commitment to transparency in all our decisions. Sophia and Isabella, thankfully, were young enough that their memories of my accident faded quickly. We told them age-appropriate versions of the truth, that some people in our family had made very bad choices, and that sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions to keep their children safe. Are the bad people in jail now? Isabella asked during one of our family meetings. Yes, sweetheart, I replied. They're in jail and they can't hurt anyone anymore. Good, Sophia said with the fierce certainty of a 6-year-old. People who hurt families should go to jail. My mother Carmen eventually returned from California, and we worked slowly to rebuild our relationship. She had been devastated to learn about Roberto and Diego's crimes, but she had also been forced to confront her own role in creating a family dynamic where money became more important than love. I always knew Roberto gambled, she admitted during one of our painful conversations. I knew Diego was struggling with his business. But I told myself it wasn't my responsibility to fix their problems. I chose not to see how desperate they were becoming. You couldn't have known they would try to kill me, I told her. No, she agreed. But I could have paid more attention. I could have asked harder questions. I could have been a better mother to all of you. Carmen used her portion of my father's assets, seized by the court as restitution, to attend gambling addiction counseling and family therapy. She also began volunteering with the Isabella Herrera Foundation, using her experience to help other family members recognize warning signs of financial desperation. The legal proceedings continued for 2 years. Diego and Roberto both attempted to appeal their sentences, claiming that my deception invalidated the evidence against them. But the recordings of their conversations, the testimony from Victor Santos, and the physical evidence of the sabotage were overwhelming. During Diego's final sentencing hearing, he was given an opportunity to make a statement. I watched from the gallery as my brother stood before the judge, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of the expensive suits he had once favored. Your Honor, he said, his voice hollow, I want to apologize to my sister for what I did. But I also want everyone to understand that I wasn't always like this. The pressure of owing money to dangerous people, the fear of losing everything I had worked for, it changed me into someone I didn't recognize. He turned to look at me directly. Olivia, I know you'll never forgive me. I know I destroyed our family. But I want you to know that the brother who taught you to ride a bicycle, who protected you from bullies at school, that person was real. The money it poisoned everything else. I felt tears on my cheeks as I listened to him. Despite everything he had done, despite the fact that he had tried to have me murdered, a small part of me still remembered the brother I had once loved. But I also remembered the cold calculation in his voice when he discussed burning down my house if the brake sabotage failed. I remembered the way he had spoken about my death as if it were a business transaction. I can't forgive you, I said when given the opportunity to make my own statement. I can't forgive you because forgiveness would require me to believe that you're truly sorry, and I don't think you are. I think you're sorry you got caught. I think you're sorry you're facing consequences. But I don't believe you're sorry for trying to murder me. Diego's face crumpled, but he didn't argue. He knew I was right. The judge sentenced him to serve the full 25 years without possibility of early parole. My father received the same terms for his 15-year sentence. As I left the courthouse that final day, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Justice had been served, but it brought no joy. My family was permanently broken, but I was finally safe. I had wealth beyond my needs, but it had come at a cost I never could have imagined. Marcus took my hand as we walked down the courthouse steps. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Empty," I admitted, "but also free." "Free to do what?" I thought about my grandmother's letter, about the foundation we were building, about Sophia and Isabella waiting at home with their homework and their bright, innocent questions about the world. "Free to build something better," I said. "Free to make sure this doesn't happen to other families." "And free to focus on the family that actually matters," Marcus added, squeezing my hand. Over the following years, the Isabella Herrera Foundation grew into one of the most respected family crisis intervention organizations in the Southeast. We worked with law enforcement to identify financial abuse patterns, helped families access counseling and mediation services, and provided emergency financial assistance to people trying to escape dangerous domestic situations. But perhaps our most important work was educational. We developed programs for high schools and colleges, teaching young people how to recognize signs of financial manipulation and family abuse. We wanted to catch these problems before they escalated to the level of violence I had experienced. During one of our presentations at the University of Miami, a young woman approached me afterward with tears in her eyes. "Ms. Gomez," she said, "I think my stepfather is stealing money from my college fund. After hearing your presentation, I realize this has been going on for months. What should I do?" I spent an hour talking with her, connecting her with resources and helping her develop a plan to protect her financial future. As she left, she turned back to me. "Thank you for sharing your story. I know it must be painful to talk about, but it's helping people like me." That conversation reminded me why my grandmother's final gift had been so perfect. She had given me not just wealth, but purpose. Not just security, but the ability to create security for others. 5 years after the trials ended, I received an unexpected letter from Diego. He was writing from prison and his handwriting looked older, more uncertain than I remembered. "Olivia," the letter began, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to try to explain something that I've been thinking about for years." He went on to describe his experience in prison therapy, his gradual understanding of how his gambling addiction and financial desperation had warped his moral compass. He wrote about the shame he felt when other inmates learned why he was there, that even among criminals, trying to murder a family member for money was considered especially despicable. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he wrote. "I know I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I understand now what I became, and I want you to know that I'm genuinely sorry for the pain I caused you and your family." The letter concluded with a request that surprised me. "I've been working with the prison's financial literacy program, helping other inmates understand how debt and addiction can destroy lives. Would you be willing to let me recommend your foundation's resources to people who are being released? Many of them have families they've hurt with their financial crimes, and I think your programs could help them rebuild those relationships." I showed the letter to Marcus and to my therapist before deciding how to respond. After much consideration, I wrote back, not to forgive Diego, but to acknowledge his request to help others. "Diego," I wrote, "I can't have a personal relationship with you. The trust that existed between us was destroyed completely, and I don't believe it can be rebuilt. But if you genuinely want to help other families avoid the mistakes our family made, I'm willing to work with the prison program to provide resources." That correspondence led to one of our foundation's most successful initiatives, a program working with correctional facilities to help inmates understand the impact of financial crimes on families and develop healthier relationship patterns before their release. I never saw Diego again in person, but through our program coordinators, I learned that he had become one of the most effective counselors in the prison system. Other inmates trusted him because he understood their desperation, but he was also uncompromisingly honest about the consequences of financial crimes. It was a small form of redemption, but it was something. My father Roberto never reached out. According to prison records, he struggled with depression and continued gambling addiction even while incarcerated. He participated minimally in counseling programs and seemed unable to accept responsibility for his actions. He died of a heart attack during his 8th year in prison, and I felt nothing but sadness when I received the news. Carmen and I attended his funeral together, a small, quiet service with only a handful of people present. As we stood by his grave, my mother spoke the words I had been feeling but couldn't articulate. "I loved him for 40 years, she said quietly. But I didn't really know him. Maybe I never wanted to know him." "We can't save people who don't want to be saved," I replied. "Abuela taught me that." As Sophia and Isabella grew older, they began to understand more about what had happened to our family. When they were 12, they asked me directly about their grandfather and uncle, wanting to know why we never talked about them. I sat them down in our living room, the same room where I had made the decision to stage my own death, and told them an age-appropriate version of the full story. "Sometimes people make choices that hurt the people they're supposed to love," I explained. "Your grandfather and uncle made choices that were very harmful, and they had to face consequences for those choices." "But they were family," Sophia said, confused. "Families are supposed to protect each other." "That's right," I agreed. "And that's why their choices were so wrong. Family should never hurt family, especially not for money." Isabella, always the more analytical of the twins, asked the question I had been dreading. "Mama, did you do the right thing when you pretended to be hurt?" I thought carefully before answering. I did what I thought was necessary to protect our family. But looking back, there might have been other ways to handle the situation that wouldn't have caused so much pain for people I love. "Like Dad and us?" Sophia asked. "Like Dad and you," I confirmed. I was so focused on catching the bad guys that I didn't think enough about how my choices would affect the good guys. Isabella nodded seriously. "So you learned something too?" "I learned something too," I agreed. That conversation helped me realize how much I had grown in the years since the crisis. The woman who had staged her own death had been driven by fear and a need for control. The woman I had become was more willing to trust others, more aware of the costs of deception, and more focused on building rather than destroying. Now at 34, I often think about my grandmother's words, "Money reveals character, it doesn't create it." The inheritance she left me revealed the greed and desperation that had been growing in Roberto and Diego for years. But it also revealed the love and loyalty of people like Rosa Martinez, Amanda Chen, and Carlos Mendoza, people who risked their own safety to help me. Most importantly, it revealed the strength of the family I had chosen: Marcus, Sophia, and Isabella, who forgave my mistakes and supported my healing. The Isabella Herrera Foundation continues to grow. We've helped hundreds of families navigate financial crises without resorting to violence or betrayal. We've educated thousands of young people about healthy family financial boundaries. And we've provided a model for how inherited wealth can be used to address the very problems that wealth sometimes creates. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of our work is the way it has connected me with my grandmother's true legacy. Not the money she left behind, but the values she tried to instill: integrity, compassion, and the understanding that our highest responsibility is to protect and nurture the people we love. Every time I help a family recognize and address financial abuse, I feel her presence. Every time we prevent someone from making the desperate choices that destroyed my father and brother, I know she would be proud. And every evening, when I come home to Marcus and the girls, when we sit around our dinner table sharing stories about our day, I remember that this love, this safety, this trust, is the real inheritance she left me. The money was just the tool. The love was the treasure. As I finish writing this story, Sophia and Isabella are now 15, preparing for college with the same determination and integrity that my grandmother saw in me at their age. They volunteer with the foundation, helping other young people understand healthy family relationships and financial responsibility. Marcus and I are stronger than ever, our marriage deepened by the crisis we survived and the honesty we've maintained ever since. We've learned to face challenges together rather than separately, and we've built a life based on transparency and mutual respect. Carmen has become the grandmother to Sofia and Isabella that she never quite managed to be as a mother to Diego and me. Her relationship with them is uncomplicated by the financial pressures and family dynamics that poisoned her relationships with her own children. And sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I sit in my grandmother's chair, the one piece of furniture I kept from her estate, and I think about the choices that brought me to this moment. I think about the morning Rosa Martinez saved my life with her warning. I think about the courage it took to deceive everyone I loved in order to protect them. I think about the moment I realized that my own brother was willing to kill me for money. But mostly I think about the family I've built from the ashes of the family I was born into. I think about the second chances we've given each other, the forgiveness we've earned through changed behavior rather than empty words, and the love that has proven stronger than greed, fear, or betrayal. My name is Olivia Gomez. I'm 34 years old and I survived my family's attempt to murder me for money. But more than that, I learned to build a life worth surviving for. And that, I believe, is what my grandmother always intended, not just to leave me wealthy, but to leave me wise enough to use that wealth in service of love rather than in service of itself. The shadow of inheritance no longer haunts me. Instead, it has become the foundation for everything bright and good that followed.